Biggest thing that we're, as drivers, are impressed with is the utilization of the horsepower and the torque, and having all the different options of utilizing that horsepower and torque through the transmission. With this present application we've got with the CEEMAT was the 3176 CAT, which is the electronic version. The downshifts are extremely smooth. It has the capability, as it's downshifting, to give it that little goose in between downshifts and smooths the downshift right out. With the competitor's transmission, you get up to RPM, and they're constantly wanting to upshift, and you can't stop that upshift. With this, you can. The extra speed to the job and back, we've seen in excess of 1 or 2 trips a day, over and beyond what we would have normally gotten.
As you can see, there are a lot of good reasons to drive a CEEMAT. Our goal here is to make sure you come up with a few of your own. There's nothing as frustrating as climbing into the cab with a new transmission and having it seem harder to operate than your old one. Well, you won't have that problem with the CEEMAT. It's about the easiest transmission there is to operate, but it is a little different. So we thought it'd be a good idea to take a ride, give you a feel for the CEEMAT and what it takes to get the most out of it. That way, when you climb into the cab yourself, the power of the CEEMAT will already be yours. This program will help you quickly learn how to operate the CEEMAT. You'll see some of the special functions built into the transmission. And finally, we'll show you what to do if there is a transmission malfunction, so you can get back on the road. Now, in case you're wondering, CEEMAT stands for Converter Enhanced Electronically Managed Automatic Transmission, and it's based on the famous Eaton Fuller Road Ranger twin countershaft 9-speed transmission. Converter Enhanced means a torque converter replaces the master clutch. You don't depress the clutch at idle, and the torque converter gives you 2-to-1 torque multiplication during every startup. Electronically managed means a transmission-mounted computer called an electronic control unit, or ECU, controls all of the shifting. And automatic transmission means the same thing as it has meant in cars for years. The transmission does all the upshifts and downshifts by itself. You don't work a clutch or a shift lever, but you still get special functions like upshift inhibit and skip shifting. What's interesting is Eaton originally designed CEEMAT to meet U.S. Army specifications for an automated transmission to operate under the most severe conditions. The CEEMAT in your truck meets all of those specs, including rigid requirements for reliability and durability. Today, you'll find the CEEMAT automated transmission used widely in concrete haulers and on the urban pickup and delivery runs. You can imagine drivers who have a lot of starts and stops really appreciate the CEEMAT. So, as we said, the CEEMAT starts out as a Road Ranger 9-speed transmission. Let's take a look at what you've got working for you. Remember, the torque converter replaces the clutch and allows the engine to idle while in gear. The torque converter contains 2 clutch systems. An interrupt clutch replaces the master clutch. It disengages the engine from the transmission during shifting and while in neutral. And a lock-up clutch bypasses the torque converter and couples the transmission directly to the engine above 12 miles an hour. A synchronizer system matches transmission input and output shaft speeds to ensure smooth engagements. An auto shift module selects the gears using the same shift mechanism as a Road Ranger transmission. And an electronic control unit, or ECU, controls the entire system: clutches, synchronizer, and auto shift. Several sensors supply vehicle speed, transmission shaft speed, selected gear, and other signals to the ECU. Along with automated shifting, the Eaton CEEMAT provides other automatic features like upshift inhibit, skip shift capability, shift shock protection, and you can learn everything you need to know by referring to your instruction manual for the correct operating procedures. We'll tell you about these other features a little later in this program. For now, let's take a look at the CEEMAT controls first. Now, your CEEMAT will probably be equipped with one of 3 gear shift levers: 5-position, 6-position, or 7-position. With a 5-position shifter, reverse makes the truck travel backward. Neutral is necessary when starting the engine and for stationary operations. Drive selects 3rd gear as a starting gear, then shifts automatically between 3rd and overdrive, or what would be 9th gear. The 2nd lever position signals the transmission to start in 2nd gear. Putting the lever into 2nd position while the truck is moving inhibits upshifting and forces the transmission to downshift earlier. And the 1st lever position does the same thing, except that it signals the transmission to start in 1st gear. Now, the 6th and 7th position gear shift levers add overdrive to the gear shift selection. Reverse and neutral are the same as the 5-position shifter. And 1st and 2nd are also the same as the 5-position shifter. But drive selects 3rd as the starting gear and shifts automatically between 3rd and direct. Overdrive selects 4th as the starting gear and shifts automatically between 4th and overdrive. With the 7-position gear shift lever, there are also 2 reverse ranges. Reverse low is recommended for maneuvering, especially under load conditions. Reverse high works best when you're lightly loaded and need to cover some distance. And make a note, you always go through neutral when changing reverse ranges. Okay, you know what's working for you, you know how to control it. Let's take a ride to get a feel for the CEEMAT on the open road, and then we'll put it through its paces to see how it operates under some tougher conditions like the ones you might encounter every day. This is Bob.
Hi, bud.
He's one of our test drivers and one of the people responsible for working out all of the bugs by trying to get the CEEMAT to hang up. He's driven this transmission in mud and snow and sand, the conditions you find yourself in, but worse. So, Bob, let's go for a ride.
All right.
Now, before we get started, it's important that you read the driver instruction booklet before you drive a truck with the CEEMAT, especially the warnings, initial startup, and driving tips pages. You know, they're there for a reason, and it's just smart to have all the information under your belt before you try something new. Make sure you check the gear shift instruction label too. Okay, Bob, let's say I'm lightly loaded, running on the open road, good conditions. Where do we begin?
Once you're in the cab, belt it up. Make sure your parking brake's set. Your shift lever's in neutral before you start the engine. Before you put it into gear, you always want to make sure you have at least 90 pounds of air pressure. Hold your service brakes, put the shift lever into drive or overdrive for normal driving. Release your parking brake, and the CEEMAT will do the rest.
Notice the engine RPM changes. The ECU even controls the throttle. You just put the transmission in gear, hit the throttle, and stay on the throttle throughout the shifts. Simple. So where's the catch? Let's say the CEEMAT is an instrument. It's built with the potential to make beautiful music. But unless you know how to make it perform, you can wail away all day, maybe even hear a few good tunes, but never use it to its full potential. Well, as you just saw, you can pretty much climb in and drive a CEEMAT. But to master it, to get it to perform to its built-in potential, takes a little learning. The rewards are well worth it. So let's try something with some challenge.
When you're heavily loaded, you'll want to select a starting gear lower than drive or overdrive because they start in third and fourth. With the brakes applied, move the shift lever from neutral down to 2 and then back to drive or overdrive. The CEEMAT will remember the shift into second and start in that gear. To start in first gear, move the shift lever from neutral down to first and then back to drive or overdrive. And again, the CEEMAT will remember that shift to first and start in the lower gear.
And remember, at speeds below 12 miles an hour, the torque converter gives you extra reduction too. Above 12 miles an hour, the lockup clutch engages, bypassing the torque converter. When using the engine brake, you can maximize the efficiency by pulling the shift lever back into the second lever position. This will increase the transmission downshift points, keeping the engine running toward governed RPM. Okay, CEEMAT has no problem with heavy loads. That's part of the job. But what happens when we hit mud and sand? Why don't you tell them how to drive the CEEMAT through deep sand and mud like this?
Well, what I do, or I find works best, is to pull the shift lever back into second, and that inhibits any further upshifts, and it lets you keep your RPM high, keep a lot of torque to your wheels while you pull through the sand and mud.
Thanks. Now, there are a few important points to keep in mind. For instance, don't forget to keep an eye on the temperature gauge. Converter outlet temperature shouldn't exceed 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees centigrade. Okay, so what if I do get stuck? Then what?
Well, if you do get stuck, you can shuttle shift this transmission just like any other. You get off the fuel during the shift, and as soon as you feel it engage again, you get right back on the fuel.
Thanks. CEEMAT protects your driveline from shift shock too. Even when you're shuttle shifting, it won't engage reverse until the wheel speed is under 3 miles an hour. The CEEMAT defuels the engine to protect the driveline from harsh engagements. Shuttling with a 5-position shift lever takes you back and forth between reverse and third gear, the normal starting gear. If you have a 7-position gear shift lever and you're shuttling from reverse high, the CEEMAT selects the lowest high-range gear. Shuttling from reverse low to drive automatically selects the normal starting gear. All right, let's take a look at how CEEMAT handles grades.
When driving on steep grades, the CEEMAT may skip downshift. In this case, it's best to let the CEEMAT speak for itself. Don't worry, just stay right on the throttle and the CEEMAT will pick a gear to keep moving you up the hill.
Now, keep in mind that your transmission can overheat from idling in gear too long or operating at low speeds for extended periods. So, if you're running at low speeds with heavy loads, you're opening the door to heat buildup. Be aware of it. If you notice that your oil temperature gets too high, above 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees centigrade, you need to cool the transmission. Here's how you do it. Run the transmission in a lower gear at increased engine speed. While the truck is moving, select the first or second shift lever positions. Again, These lever positions prevent the transmission from upshifting and increase the downshift RPM. That should cool the transmission. But if the transmission continues to run too hot, it may need maximum cooling. Park your truck in a safe place. Put the transmission in neutral and run the engine at 1200 to 1500 RPM. You'll find these transmission cooling procedures in the driver instruction booklet. Again, if you find yourself in this position, pay special attention to your temperatures. Follow the cooling procedures as needed, and you should be fine. Okay, Bob, why don't you tell them about a transmission-driven PTO?
Well, it's really not that much different than a conventional transmission. You hold your service brakes and put your shift lever in drive like we talked about earlier. That stops your counter shafts. Then you engage your PTO, move your shift lever back to neutral, and you're all set.
For a mobile PTO operation, you can move the truck and even shuttle shift. If you have an engine-driven PTO, it doesn't affect transmission operation. You have unlimited mobile and stationary operations. Okay, so the CEEMAT is pretty tough, but what if there is a problem? Well, the CEEMAT offers some excellent features that can save you time, such as self-diagnostics if you do run into trouble. You heard right. The CEEMAT can usually tell you where it hurts. You can imagine how that simplifies things. Let's talk a little about what to do if a problem comes up while you're on the road. The first important point is that the Eaton Fuller CEEMAT includes a limp home mode that gets you home even if there's a failure in one of the system components. You see, the CEEMAT needs information from several sensors to shift successfully. Engine speed, input shaft speed, output shaft speed, and the position of the shift lever. If the ECU loses any of these inputs, it goes into limp home mode and uses the remaining operating parts of the system to get you to a point where you can get service. For instance, you might notice that the transmission won't go into reverse, or that the transmission won't upshift or downshift, but will still move, or that the transmission won't engage all of the ratios or skip shifts. If there is a failure in any CEEMAT component, the service transmission lamp on the dash may go on. A flashing lamp means the ECU has stored a fault code in its memory. In other words, the CEEMAT has already isolated the problem, and if you retrieve the code or codes stored in the ECU memory, you'll know what you're working with. Retrieving the codes is easy. Here's how you do it. Stop the truck, put the gear shift in neutral, and set the parking brake. Now, the CEEMAT displays the fault codes by flashing the transmission lamp in sequences. One flash means number 1, 2 flashes means number 2, etc. So, when you're ready, turn the key off on within 5 seconds. Don't worry if the engine stops, but be careful not to engage the starter. Just watch the lamp. It'll flash 2-digit fault codes. For instance, the first code is 3 flashes, 2 flashes. That's code 32. Pause. 2 flashes, 1 flash. That's code 21. When the list is complete, it repeats. Write down the fault codes so you can give them to the technician when you take your truck in for service. After you record the stored codes, you can reset the CEEMAT and get back out on the road if you're not at a service area. Now, you may find that this reset corrects the problem, but it's a good idea to mention the codes to your technician and to have the transmission serviced as soon as possible. To perform a reset, turn off the engine for at least 15 seconds, then restart. If the reset doesn't clear the failure, perform the troubleshooting sequence in the back of the driver instruction booklet. This includes making sure you have enough air pressure, at least 90 psi. The oil should be at the proper level on the dipstick, and the power circuit breakers or fuses are okay. You see, the CEEMAT gives you everything you need to diagnose the transmission, and it's designed to let you know when it's safe to continue driving to a service area and when it's not. If the transmission service light is on steady, not flashing, there's a problem that needs immediate attention. Stop the truck, do not drive, and call for assistance. Hands-off shifting, military toughness, computerized self-diagnostics. Eaton adds computer control, ease, and convenience to the legendary performance and reliability of the Road Ranger. Eaton, technology you can depend on.